it's Chantel from Williamwood right here. In this video, I'm doing a long-form tutorial to show you how I made this Opal Inlay pen blank. These are a few examples of inlays that I've done previously. I love using Opal because it adds a really eye-catching color pop to my work. You can use all kinds of material for inlay work. This one is gold foil, which I think looks really sharp paired with the gold pen hardware. So the first step is selecting the right blank. I have a collection stashed away in my shop of blanks with all kinds of voids, bark inclusions, cracks, and wormholes. I set these aside specifically for inlay projects. These blanks have all been stabilized with cactus juice resin. I prefer using stabilized blanks for inlays, especially ones like these that have holes, cracks, or voids, because they're so much more prone to breaking or blowing out during drilling and turning. Unstabilized wood also continues to lose moisture and shift slightly over time, which can cause it to shrink. When that happens, an inlay that was perfectly flush at first can start sitting proud of the surface. Stabilizing doesn't make the wood completely immune to movement, but it greatly reduces it and helps everything stay consistent. I'm looking for a blank with natural voids that I can fill with Opal. It's hard to tell from the outside what you're going to find on the inside, so I tried to look at the ends and sides to determine how deep the holes might be. This piece of maple burl has a big inclusion on one end, which would work really well for the single barrel pen I'll be turning. It looks like it runs fairly deep, so it'll be a great pocket to pack a bunch of Opal into. I'm marking my cut line to include as much of the inclusion as possible. I'm expecting that at least some of the spark will come out while turning, and I'll remove the rest by hand after it's sanded. After drilling and gluing in the brass tube, I let the adhesive cure completely. Once it's set, I mount the blank on the lathe for turning. I'm using a round carbide cutter and starting with light, gentle cuts. Since there are a few fragile areas that could chip or pop out, I'm taking my time and going slow till the blank is round. I'm stopping every so often to check out what the inclusion is looking like. And it seems like this one is going through the entire width of the blank, which I like because that means I can add Opal on both sides. Once I'm just about down to the bushings, I'm doing the final shaping with 80 grit sandpaper. I find this helps prevent last-minute blowouts, especially on a more fragile blank like this. So this is what it looks like turned. Now I'm going to go in with a rotary tool and remove the rest of this material to make room for the Opal. This actually stayed together really well while turning, so I'm going to remove quite a bit more material while keeping the natural shape of the voids. This pointed V-shaped bit is great for carving fine details and engraving. You can hold the blank in place in a vise if it helps. I find I've got more control just holding it by hand so I can turn it around when I need to. Before I start inlaying, I'm just brushing out sawdust with a small brush so it doesn't end up mixed in with the glue. So these are the materials I use during the inlaying process. I've got C-Bond CA glue from CEC Corp in medium and thin. And I use the C-Set accelerator, also from CEC Corp, which sets CA glue pretty much instantly. I also use these little inlay tips, which attach right onto the existing glue cap. These are great for placing glue when you need it to be precise in small areas. I use this little brush throughout the process for clearing dust out of holes. You'll see when I start turning that some pieces of Opal will pop out and will leave little pinholes that need to be refilled. This is an inlay tool. It's got a little scooper on one end and a paddle on the other end, which I use to pack down Opal. I also used tweezers and a dental pick to help place Opal where I want it to go. And of course, I have Opal. This is a lab-grown polymer impregnated synthetic opal, about 80% silica and 20% resin. Because it's lab-grown, it's much more consistent and affordable and easier to work with than natural opal. It's a high-quality option that features vertical fire, meaning the flashes of color move up through the material rather than just across the surface. Before moving on to choosing colors, I want to point out something I noticed early on when I first started working with synthetic opal. Some colors appear to shift when they're set against darker backgrounds, especially once glue is added. It's just an optical effect from the way the light passes through the opal and the adhesive. It doesn't actually change the opal itself. You can see how this yellow color takes on a greenish tone when the glue is applied against the black background, but if I move it over to the white, that effect disappears. So what I usually do to retain that saturated color is lay down a small amount of mica powder before adding opal on top. I like using mica because I've got lots of this on hand, but you can achieve the same thing with craft paint. Mica powder comes in all kinds of colors, and I try to match the color of the mica to the color of the opal I want to use. I find this really helps the opal pop. You can also use a white mica or paint. You just want to make sure that you get full coverage with the opal so none of the white peeks through. This is one of the first opal inlays I made, and I started with white paint and then realized that you can see the white around the edges of some of the holes, especially in the red and orange. So as I continued, I tried to keep the paint a little below the surface of the blank, and by the end where these pink and purple sections are, I started color matching the paint to the opal. Also, this was done on a non-stabilized piece of burl, so after time, as the wood started to shrink around the opal, it developed these little ridges. Okay, so now on to my favorite part, picking out the colors. I want a color that's going to contrast nicely with this darker maple. These jars are 1 gram each and go for $10.99 Canadian at the time of this video. Since this wood's got a bit of a cooler tone, I'm going with this dark teal opal called Marine. For mica powder, I've got a few different blues to choose from. This peacock green looks like the closest match. I'm going to start filling this big hole with medium CA. I chose medium because I can see some gaps between the blank and the tube that I want to seal, and the medium will fill it up faster. So I'm just concentrating on the edges for now. Then I take a small scoop of mica powder with my inlay tool and tap it off the scoop into the hole. Tapping helps deposit a smaller amount of powder, so it's more of a sprinkle than a pile. Once I've got that laid in, I'm using my dental pick to spread it to the edges and create a base layer of color. And I'm just trying to clean it up as I go. Then I'm saturating the powder with thin CA. This bottle of thin CA has been around for a while, so it's not as watery as it should be. Ideally, a few drops will soak right through the mica. Once you open it, CA gets thicker with age, so I'll have to take some extra time to spread it in. Okay, I'm adding a few more drops and I'm going to start placing some opal. I'm going in with the scoop and using it to fill in the hole. As it gets filled up, I use the same tool and tamp down the pieces and push them into all the little gaps around the edge. With the paddle end, I actually try to crush the opal down just slightly, which packs it in further. The little pieces that break off help to fill in the smaller gaps. I've also used a mortar and pestle on other projects to crush it and fill it into fine cracks. Once it's filled to the surface, I add a few more drops of thin CA and then spray a small amount of accelerator to set it. You want to use the accelerator sparingly. It causes the glue to cure very quickly, and if you apply too much accelerator, the chemical reaction can happen too fast and make the glue look cloudy and white. So hold the nozzle 8 to 10 inches away and just let it mist down lightly onto the blank. I got this tray from Easy Inlay. It makes it easy to spread out the pieces without them going all over the place and dump them back into the jar when you're done. As the glue soaks in and sets, the opal tends to shift around a little bit and settle, so I'm going back in to top off any dips or empty spaces. I'm placing these pieces in dry and dropping a small amount of glue over top. Once the glue is fully cured, I turn the blank over and start working on the other side of the hole with the same process. As you're watching this, keep in mind there is no single right way to do this. If you already have a method that works for you, stick with it. And let me know in the comments what techniques you use. I'm always curious to hear how other turners approach it. Okay, now that I've got the large holes done, I'm adding a few pieces to these smaller holes. I skip the mica powder for these ones because it's just such a small space. I like to let the blank sit overnight to make sure the glue is absolutely fully set the whole way through. Once it's dry the next day, I mount it back on the lathe and use a negative rake carbide cutter to remove the opal that's sitting above the surface of the blank. A negative rake cutter has 2 beveled edges instead of just one, which makes cutting less aggressive. It gives you a smoother, more controlled cut and helps prevent catches or chip outs, especially when you're working with brittle materials. I recommend negative rake cutters for synthetics like acrylic. It's not meant for fast material removal, but it's great for getting a clean finish and keeping more fragile blanks intact. So as I'm cutting, I'm focusing just on the opal. The blank is already shaped the way I want it, so I'm being careful not to touch the wood. I'm not trying to get the opal perfectly flushed yet. I'll take care of that later with sandpaper. For now, I just want to remove some of the bulk. Stopping to check how it looks, and you can see all the opal popped out of that small hole at the end. I didn't cut all the way down to the tube with my rotary tool on that one, so the opal was closer to the surface and not as secure. On the rest of the blank, it looks like only a couple small pieces popped out, so those will be really easy to fill back in. I'm taking it down just a bit further to reduce how much sanding I'll need later. At this point, I don't expect anything else to pop out. That usually only happens when opal pieces are sticking out too far and catch on the cutter. Before I start filling in the new holes, I'm brushing out the dust. You can also use an air compressor to do this if you're gentle. Before I break out the opal again, I like to set a container lid on the lathe bed to catch any pieces that fall. The holes only need a piece or two of opal to fill them, so I'm using tweezers to set them in place, then repeating the same process of filling, gluing, and curing all the way around. Once the glue is completely dry, I go back in with the negative rake cutter to smooth everything down. Then to get the opal perfectly flush with the wood, I switch to sandpaper, starting with 150 grit. I'm still being careful not to remove too much wood, just lightly blending the surface. I'll repeat that with each grit, working up to 600. And I try to buff out any visible sanding marks before moving on to the next one. There are a couple of tiny pinholes still, which I'm not going to worry about because I'll be doing a CA finish and that will fill them. Before starting the finish, I'm switching over to non-stick CA bushings. These prevent the blank and the metal bushings from getting glued together and chipping when removed. They're made of Delrin and slightly tapered, so they fit into a wide range of pen tube sizes. I give the blank a quick wipe with a small amount of isopropyl alcohol to remove any dust or residue. For the finish, I'm using thin CA on a blue shop towel folded into a narrow strip. I applied 10 coats, spraying accelerator between each one with the lathe running at a low speed. I'm still seeing some pinholes, so I'm adding a couple coats of medium CA to help fill them in. Next, I sand with micromesh sheets, starting at 1500 grit all the way up to 12,000 grit. When sanding, I concentrate most on that first grit. I want to make sure the surface is consistent and smooth before moving on to the higher grits. After 12,000, that finish is looking super glossy. I'm topping it off with Novus plastic polish. This is the fine scratch remover. I always use a plastic polish on CA finishes. I think it really does kick it up a notch. I'm using a blue shop towel again to apply this while the lathe is turning at a slow speed and buffing it in for about 30 seconds and then buffing it back off. This is dry to touch right away, so I'm taking it off the lathe and cleaning up the ends. This is the final result of the inlay. I really like how the color turned out. It looks really bright and vibrant, and the blue contrasts nicely with the maple burl. I also really like the variation in sizes of the holes in this blank. I think it adds some interest and looks natural. I'm assembling this on a Solano ballpoint pen kit by Beaufort. Before I press in the clip and finial assembly, I'm deciding where I want the clip to sit on the blank to best highlight the inlay. As I press it in, I lift the clip up just slightly so it doesn't drag and leave any scratches on my fresh finish. This is one of my favorite pens to use on a daily basis. I've been using the gold foil pen from the beginning of this video since the day I made it. I find it really comfortable to hold, and the finial twist at the top moves the smoothest of any twist pen I've used. Okay, this is the final result of the Marine Opal Inlay and Maple Burl pen blank, finished with C8 and assembled on a Solano ballpoint pen in chrome. I love working with Opal. It's a slower, detailed process that takes patience, and I really enjoy that part. It's satisfying watching it all come to life when the finish goes on. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this build, let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more turning tutorials.